Welcome to Circle Sanctuary Network Podcasts, brought to you by Circle Sanctuary, one of the oldest nature spirituality churches in the United States, connecting people of nature-centered paths around the world. Join us through the week for a variety of shows discussing various topics, celebrating the divine in all of its forms, through nature worship, rituals, education, and building bridges of community.
Good evening, good morning, good night, good second breakfast, whenever you are, wherever you are. My name is Laura Gonzalez, and I'd like to welcome you to Lunatic Mondays, Lunes, Lunáticos, the very first bilingual show for CSNP, the Circle Sanctuary Network podcast. And tonight, I am so very happy. I have a guest whom I love and admire, and I need to be pinched every time I remember that we're friends, because when you admire somebody that much and then you become friends, it's like a dream come true. And but he's so full of love, and he loves everybody, and everybody can be his friend. So if you haven't reached out and get close to Kristoffer Hughes, you sleeping on that one. So let me tell you who he is. Kristoffer Hughes, he is in Wales, and he's the chief of the Anglican Druid Order, a Mount Haemus scholar, and a member of the Order of Bards, Obates, and Druids. He is a teacher, writer, worship leader, and guest speaker at pagan conferences, camps, and festivals throughout the United Kingdom, Europe, and North America. Hughes has also contributed to Welsh and English television and radio. He's the author of 4 books, rather 6, I think. Some of them are beautiful, about death and dying, and it's just fantastic. And he's also the creator of the Celtic Tarot, which is wonderful too. Hughes is also a death service professional for Her Majesty's Coroner Service. He hosts frequent Amicus Mortis Friends of Death, Death Midwifery and Mortality Salience courses in person and online via his Facebook page. For news and events, you can look up his website, www.anglicandruidorder.co.uk. And oh my goodness, I am so honored and happy to have you here. Welcome, Kristoffer. How are you?
Hello, Laura. How are you? I'm very well, thank you. Over here, all festive and festooned for the midwinter festivities.
Yes, we're still celebrating because, you know, why end in one weekend? Of course, all the Christmas and solstice and everything has happened, but according to various different calendars of the world, you know, still things are still happening. So, you know, let's continue with the festivities.
Exactly. You can never have enough festivities. So festoon everything with festivities.
Life is too short not to have festivities. Speaking about life is too short, I have to say, kind of like off topic but related, about enjoying life. What a wonderful, wonderful course. I am yours truly. I'm very proud to say I have certified myself with Kristoffer Hughes on this Amicus Mortis course. And very quickly, kind of like to be off topic for a minute, how did you get motivated to teach such wonderful course and teachings for people who want to dedicate themselves to that?
No, well, thank you very much for coming on it. I really appreciate it. Because so basically that is my profession. So my professional life is working for Her Majesty's Coroner at a public morgue or a mortuary or coroner's facility. So for a number of years, for at least the last 20 years, I've been teaching mortality salience and end of life subjects for not only people within the alternative communities, like pagan communities and so on, but also for death service professionals and also health service professionals as well. So I've always been within that world, and our training is very intensive. It's quite intensive. We study anatomical pathology for 4 years, which includes mortality salience and end of life subjects and death, dying and bereavement. So, and although, you know, I'm a druid, I'm a practicing druid, I would still say that in the field of death, I am an expert, I guess, in that field. And I always feel as if I have more expertise in that field than I do in my druid field, you know, even though you could say I'm fairly accomplished with my druidry and my book writing and all of that, I still feel sometimes that the little imposter syndrome will start speaking to me and whispering in my ear. But that never does when it comes to death, dying, and bereavement, because I think it's just something that I do 8 to 10 hours a day, and I have done for the last 32 years now. So it's a part of the very fabric of my being. So, and then to be able to help other people fathom their way through, it can be a minefield of information and disinformation as well, has always been a calling. It's always been something that has called me into its service, and I really enjoy doing that. So yeah, it's just been a part and parcel of who I am professionally, and also what drives me and motivates me as a person to empower people through a system that has kind of served to disempower so many people over so many decades. So it's nice to just be a cog in the wheel of getting people to understand that there's always another way. There's always another way of looking at things and another way of doing things. It's lovely. I really appreciate the opportunities I've had in my career to be able to talk about these things.
And I, as your student, I think you do a great, wonderful, fantastic job. Also because the focusing on the bereavement and the surviving family members and how they carry on with life and all of that. And I really appreciate that, hence me taking the course with you. Of course, I love it. And but let's go back to the festive part of the year. The year is dying. So, the year is dying, exactly. So it's part of it.
It is.
So now that the year is dying and we have all these wonderful tools, which is, the ability to connect like this, live in the present. You're in Wales, I'm in Chicago, and we're here. We are live through magic. All these traditions are no longer regional, but I was very touched, and I listened and I learned, for example, when you were talking about Mabon and explaining and teaching to all of us about the traditions and how certain people just had taken the traditions without even understanding, not even the pronunciation, right?
Yeah.
So Mabon, no Maven, and
that's it.
It is Mabon and Galangeyev,
that's right.
Galangeyev.
Yeah.
And so today I want to hear it from someone who lives the tradition. I'm very curious because I'm all about Krampus. Lord knows I am obsessed.
I love me a bit of Krampus.
Oh my God. But Mari Lwyd, she is just fantastic. Tell us everything about her.
Oh my word, there's so much to tell. I just like yourself, I absolutely love the Mari Lwyd. And the Mari Lwyd has been a part of my upbringing, a part of my cultural landscape for my entire life, to one extent or another, And we have our own Mari Lwyd. She's called Mari Lwyd Morn spelt M-O-N, and she has her own Facebook page as well. So you can pop over and find Mari Lwyd Morn on Facebook. But essentially, the tradition is shrouded in quite a bit of mystery. So the tradition of peculiar horses in Britain is not unusual. There are several winter and even some summer horse traditions, like the Houdinin horse, there's the Obi horse, there's all sorts of regional differences when it comes to horses. But the first literal example, or the first literal evidence for the practice of the Mari Lwyd, came from Reverend Evans, who wrote a book in 1798 called A Journey Through a Part of North Wales. And in North Wales, he encountered the Mari Lwyd. So the majority of people might think that the Mari Lwyd is a South Walian tradition or a South Wales tradition. But Mr. Evans's book, which is the first encounter in the English language of the Mari Lwyd, also said that it was present in North Wales. But there was another horse as well in North Wales called the Cadi Ha. And the Cadi Ha was associated with Beltane. She was associated with Calan Mai. But again, you kind of think, Calan Gaeaf and Gaeaf Winter and the Cadence of Winter and Calan Mai or Beltane, they're both liminal times, aren't they? You know, they're both hinge points within the year. So it makes sense that there's this peculiar liminal creature that occupies that particular time of year. But there was another creature as well in Wales called the Bwca Llwyd, or the grey pucca. And again, that was a horse's skull. And other traditions of horses had their time at Calan Gaeaf, not just during the Yuletide period, but also at Calan Gaeaf and also at Calan Mai or Beltane. But what essentially happened was that in South Wales, there was a handful of towns, Cardiff, Llangynwyd, Llantrisant, parts of Glamorgan, that had preserved the tradition, and the tradition persisted and then dwindled drastically in the early part of the 20th century. And by the 1960s, they were almost wiped out. But a family in Llangynwyd or Llantrisant, either one of those two places, had decided to carry on the tradition, and they're essentially the longest running, the original, if you like, version of the old Mari Lwyd. So for people who don't know, thinking, what on earth is this Mari Lwyd thing? It's essentially a horse's skull that's articulated by various means, usually a pole, that causes the jaw to snap. And the eyes are usually, in the 21st century, we use Christmas tree baubles, you know, little round balls that you can put string lights into, so they're lit. And our Mari Lwyd, she has copper ears. Her ears are made of copper, and she's decorated in ribbons, and then a long white shroud runs from the back of her head all the way down to the ground. And underneath the Mari is an operator that has the stick, usually in a flagpole harness, and will navigate and operate the Mari from underneath. So the Mari would go from house to house. And the thing that's rather unique about the Welsh Mari, and it seems that she was a part of the Welsh landscape long before anything was ever written about her. And she would go from tavern to tavern and house to house, and there would be a bardic battle of wits. So the Mari party would sing a punco, which it's poorly translated as a chant, but a punco is a bardic battle. So they would sing a punco after knocking the door, and the people on the inside would have to improvise a punco back, which would have to be strictly metered according to bardic laws. And if they failed, then the Mari would be allowed entry into the house, and misrule and mayhem would ensue. And she would snap, and she would demand beer, and she would demand money, and she would demand chocolates and food and all sorts of lovely things. And then they would be singing, and there'd be merriment. And so essentially that's the tradition. And the tradition happens from anywhere from Christmas Eve, the secular Christmas Eve, all the way through to Hen Galan, or the Old New Year, which is around the 16th of January here in Wales. And that's the time when the Mari Lwyd goes back to sleep in most traditions. So she was here, she was a part of the landscape, and she kind of disappeared a little bit, but now she's coming back. And there's an amazing organization called TRAC. You can find TRAC by just looking for TRAC and put Wales in after it, and you'll find them. And they're the folk development people for Wales, and they've encouraged schools and colleges to create their own Mari Lwyds, and they even have a flat pack Mari Lwyd that you can create, because, you know, horses' skulls are not necessarily easy to come by, you know. And so they've created a flat pack Mari so that you can create your own and carry on the tradition. And they provide CDs and DVDs and booklets explaining what the tradition is about. And of course, tradition is a living thing, you know. And whilst I guess it's very tempting for pagans to think, oh, this is such a pagan symbol, this dead horse that's animated for the winter season. But we don't actually have any evidence, no tangible evidence to suggest that it is an ancient pagan practice. But what we can speculate is that elements of the Mari Lwyd and the other horse traditions may have had their origin in pre-Christian times, because we're obsessed with horses in Britain. There's white chalk horses on hills. They're on coins. They're in our mythologies. They're everywhere. You know, and just across the English Channel, which is only 21 miles in France, they eat horses. But here, there is outrage at the mere thought of anybody eating a horse. It's a cultural taboo. So they seem to be an inexorable part of the very fabric of what it is to be British almost. So the Mari Lwyd is probably something old, but we don't know what that was. Nothing's written about it. But it worried people, and it worried one particular Methodist minister in the 1800s. It worried him so much because he could see within the Mari Lwyd that there was elements of things that were not Christian per se. So he wrote a book about it, and he wrote a book to warn his parishioners about the Mari. It's like, this is what you need to look for. These are all the chants. If you hear them, you need to tell these people to stop. But what he did inadvertently was he preserved the entire tradition. He preserved all of it. And I've got his book up here on my bookcase, and it's written in Welsh, and it records the tradition impeccably with so many verses, you know, and you think, oh, the poor man, he's not turning in his grave. I think he's probably spinning in it, you know. Yeah. It was not his intention to do that. So we have all this richness. So many Mari troops now exist, not just here in Wales, but all over the world. That she has literally taken wings and gone all over the world. And as a Druid tradition, we've incorporated her into our tradition, but we're also very honest about how we use the Mari. We wake her up at Calan Gaeaf. She's not always wholly associated with Calan Gaeaf, but that's when we wake her up because she becomes our sovereign of winter. So she represents to us in the Druid tradition, Rhiannon, the horse goddess, in her guise as winter sovereign, in her guise as the winter queen. And Rhiannon has psychopompic qualities, and the Mari Lwyd has some psychopompic elements to her as well. So to us, it fits in really nicely and beautifully. But at the same time, that's within our tradition. That isn't necessarily how other people in the secular world perceive the Mari Lwyd. But the fact that we can work with her in that way, people can work with her secularly, people can work with her folklorically, traditionally, vernacularly, all of these ways, means that she's really versatile. You know, and she wants to live again. And I think when mythological and folkloric components come back into the populist imagination, the very spirit of that thing is trying to tell us something. And we have to listen to whatever its message might be. So, and we're still working that out, but we're willing to go on that journey with her, you know?
Yeah. And I absolutely love a number of things about everything that you just shared with us. The first one is like, this Christian boys should stop trying to eradicate this customs because every time they try to do it with Samhain, make Halloween. They tried to do it with Plaza Chimaco and Shakawetzin, and they made Day of the Dead, and they tried to do it with Mari Lwyd, and there she is, alive and well. The second part that I'm fascinated about is it's a female energy, it's a female representation. It is that feminine divine or that feminine secular image, but that hunger that we have to connect with the mother, with the motherly essence. And I think we all have that planetary need to represent and to reconnect with something feminine, divine. And I love the honesty in which you present this. That is not necessarily proven to be pagan, but it can be very well appreciated. And I always tell people, and you know, y'all can quote me on this, I love saying it, the difference between appreciation and appropriation is education. And when you have that educational depth and part of it, it's, you know, like, you know what you're doing and you know how you can integrate it to a pagan practice. But let's be honest, we cannot affirm because we cannot confirm that is pagan. I love that. I love that.
Exactly. And we always encourage people, the Mari Lwyd troops. I know Mari Lwyd troops in the United States. I know of one in Australia as well. And what I say to them all is it's amazing. It's wonderful that the Mari Lwyd has taken wings. But I also ask that it's important that they appreciate the bardic battle, and that if they can, that they retain that, because it does retain an element of its cultural significance. And of course, and the only way people are going to appreciate that and incorporate that is if they're educated to do that, just like you mentioned. So that education is important. And also, it's a lot of fun, you know, when people have to devise poetry, and they can either do it improvised or non-improvised, and they can have it all written down. Because when we host our public ritual, and for the winter solstice, and Mari Lwyd is present, the people who are there, they don't necessarily know that Mari is going to appear. So we have the words already written down for them, but they're still participating in the spirit of that tradition. And it's interesting about what you said about, you know, the feminine energy, and to us, she you know how in anthropological terms, the goddess has two faces, the loving mother and the terrible mother. And we see that in the Mari Lwyd, in Rhiannon as the loving mother, and Mari Lwyd as the terrible mother, but not terrible in a denigratory manner, but terrible as in the threat of winter, the very threat of nature, the danger within nature, the red in, you know, the red in tooth and claw nature of nature. And she represents that, this peculiar spectre that comes to us from the other world, dead but not dead, animated and moving. And the fascinating thing is that the operator of our Mari is called Barry, and so we refer to him lovingly as Barry the Mari. And so he's the operator of the Mari, and he claims, as have so many other Mari operators, that when they don the Mari, something arrives and pushes them out of the way, and he feels that time, it becomes meaningless when he's underneath the shrouds, because he can't see outside. He's entirely dependent on the Osler, the guide, to lead the Mari through whatever ritual or ceremony we're participating in. So they're in a really liminal space. And there is one vernacular little anecdotal story that says that because the majority of Mari Lwyd operators are men and not women, even though she's a female energy. And it's like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder why. And one of the theories for that is that having a man underneath weakens the portal slightly. That if it was a woman who was underneath, the portal might be so strong, winter might never, ever leave.
Wow.
And again, there's this threat of I am nature, you know. So if the portal is weak, she can be taken off, and spring will eventually come. And I like those little thoughts, those little theories that people have had over the years, and it ties in beautifully to the fact that when Barry becomes the Mari, Barry disappears. He literally dissolves somehow. It's the most peculiar thing, and that we have no sense of Barry being there. He is simply not present at all. And Mari, and you see how people react to it. The reaction is beautiful, it's frightening, it's intriguing, it's imposing. The reaction that people have is one of immense veneration and awe. And you think, it's a skull on a stick with a sheet hanging off of it. But it really isn't. And I would defy anybody who ever meets the Mari in person to have that opinion once they've met her.
I would love to see her, you know. That's fantastic. When one is in this environment, when you are in a pub, tavern, and then here she comes and knocks on the door, and of course, everything is now, we're in the 21st century. There's cameras, there's video, there's this and that and the other. can you come close to her? Can you caress her? Can you touch her? Or do you, what do people, I think I will be so impressed and you know, like immersed into just looking at her, that is kind of like the call of the void, that you want to touch her but maybe you shouldn't. So what do people do? What are the actual reactions?
There's two reactions. There's the initial reaction as Mari arrives at whatever location she's at, and there's this spirit of misrule, this spirit of she's naughty, she's a naughty mare, you know, she's a stroppy mare, and she bites, she snaps at you, and she snaps. And what is also interesting, and this is my hypothesis, my own personal hypothesis, is whenever I've seen, so there's an event that happens at Hen Galan, Old New Year. It happens in the town of Chepstow in South Wales, which borders England. And every year, all of the Mari Lwyds of Wales go to that town, and the Morris men of England will cross over the bridge to Wales, and mayhem ensues. It's just perfect and wonderful. But the Maris, they snap towards people's genitals. They snap towards their private parts. And I find that interesting, because the operators are not necessarily aware of what they're doing. But when you look, you see all of the Maris, they snap at people's genitals. And I'm like, why are they doing that? So I've asked Barry, why are you doing that? And he's like, I'm not really aware that I am. It's just Mari doing what Mari does. And I've often wondered, is that something that is trying to stop the fertility coming back? It's like, this is my reign. I will be winter. Winter will last forever. And there's almost as if there's this desire for, no, it won't come back, and I'll make sure it doesn't come back because I'll bite your privates off. You know?
That is wonderful.
So I like these observations that you can make. So people have this, they're repelled initially because she's so naughty. So they usually jump back and they're a little bit frightened, and there's lots of laughter. But once that has happened and Mari is there, and there's music and there's singing and there's drinks, because she likes to drink. Girl likes to drink, you know. And but then people are very tactile with her. And I don't know if you've watched any of our Mari Lwyd awakening rituals, but we can't help but stroke her and kiss her, and she'll shake her mane, and children in particular, children love her. They want to stroke her and touch her and put their hands in her mouth, you know, and she'll snap and eat their hands. You know? And it's the most peculiar thing to watch humans interacting with Mari Lwyd. It is so peculiar, but so damn magical. I love it. It's
beautiful. It's beautiful. I wish that somebody brings it to Chicago, but I wish that they bring it in a way that is respectful and traditional, and like you say, you know, that it continues with what the tradition is about, and the mayhem and all that. So is there a particular day, or is it like throughout the season that this mayhem happen?
So for the Mari Lwyd, traditionally, that entire mayhem happens around Christmas tide. So it happens during midwinter and New Year. So you'll see the local troops around here, so in Flint and in Wrexham, they tend to go out either around the winter solstice or Christmas Eve, and then they might come back out again on New Year's Eve. And then in South Wales, they might do it the other way around, you know, and they might all come out at New Year's Eve or Hen Galan, the old New Year. But it tends to happen around that midwinter festival time, and it seems that, and it might lend itself, as opposed to generosity, to hospitality, because people are more hospitable during that particular time. They may have extra food that could have gone towards helping the people who were guiding the Mari through the villages, because there was a lot of winter traditions that was about charity and about giving to the poorest members of the community. And those members of the community they may possibly have been part of the Mari Lwyd troop, and were then given gifts in return for being basically guardians of culture and tradition. So there are a lot of little idiosyncrasies that may be possible within the Mari Lwyd tradition, but I think so much of it hinges on hospitality, generosity, hope and warmth from inside the home to those who are outside and cold. And if you read the Ballad of the Mari Lwyd, it was written in the early part of the 20th century by an English poet who was so completely bowled over by the Mari Lwyd. He wrote this entire ballad for her, and it's massive. It is massive. But again, it's about letting her in. Will you let her in? And those words are used so much within the Pwnco in the Welsh language. There's this sentiment of, will you let her in? So exactly what are you letting in? You know, and to us, of course, as Druids, you're letting in the sovereignty of winter and accepting your fate within the hands of winter. And she is that fate. So there's so much depth of beauty and magic just hiding underneath those shrouds, you know, of this dead living thing. It is peculiar. And we were lucky with Mari Lwyd Morn in that we found the skull. The skull had been found by an artist decades ago, several decades ago, I think like 60 years ago, on Dartmoor, which is a moor in the southern parts of not far from Cornwall. And she had taken this skull back to her studio and she'd loved it. She'd festooned it with love. She'd painted it. She'd put ribbons on it. And it was a part of her life. And then she died. And her children thought, what are we going to do with this skull? But she loved it, but they didn't have a connection to it. So they put it up for sale, and we were the ones who found her. And Barry the Mari, drove all the way down to the south of England to collect our Mari. And they were over the moon that she was going to a home that would love her, that would care for her, and bring her to life, just like her mother had. So Barry and Crystal are the guardians of our Mari Lwyd Morn, and their two children have literally been brought up with the Mari tradition. So they're there and they're responsible for waking her up. They're responsible for her coffin. They're responsible for her shrouds, and they care for her and her needs. And then at the very end of the year, the tradition within the Anglesey Druid Order and our Mari is that Barry and Crystal's sons, who are not so little now, they're 14 and 11, I think, and they sing lullabies to her, and they put her in her coffin and they sing lullabies to her, and then they close her coffin and she goes to sleep as spring returns to the land. So it's become this beauty, and that is something that they do. It's not something that the whole order does. And that's what's so beautiful about it. It has this personal, beautiful, loving element to it, where two boys who were once really little sing her to sleep and love her. They love her, they adore her. And when she's not causing mayhem around the landscape, she sits on their mantle. She sits in the heart of their home, on their hearth. She sits there with her eyes lit, and she's just there. She's just a part of who we are.
What an honor! What a beautiful family tradition must be for them. And I will be honored, to house her while she's slumbering and waiting for winter to come back. I love it. So I have to ask you this silly question. It is a silly question, but I have to ask you. Because you and I like Krampus. We were talking behind the scenes. We were talking about our love for Krampus. And of course, me being Mexican, I love anything that is death and scary because, we're Mexicans. We love death. I'm sorry. The fact that you all think about it as morbid is on you. There's nothing morbid about it. But anyway, I'm surrounded by skulls here. So it's like, there's one right here. For those who can't see it, there's one right here. Anyway.
What can I tell you? I work in a morgue, Go figure.
People don't get it. That's where we connect, you know. And I think, you know, I think it's love of life that makes us be so close to death. It's just love of life. It's love in life. So anyway, Krampus.
Your silly question.
Silly question. Krampus and all these traditions that are winter, scary, original, all European traditions that they have jumped to the American continent. And here in the United States, they are taking a life of their own. And then, of course, because paganism, because again, we are so connected in the world. I had just seen somebody a couple of weeks ago in Uruguay, I think, having a cup of coffee, and their mug had a Krampus on it. And now you have a person in Uruguay celebrating Krampus. So here comes the silly question. There is this little thing that is almost like a competition about who is the coolest, scary winter representative of scary Christmas. What is your take on it? Have you heard about it? Because some people are like, I'm Team Krampus. Some people are like, I'm Team Mari Lwyd. I'm Team every single one of them because I love all of them. But yeah, I'm a little more obsessed with Krampus because he hates children. But but have you heard of it? And what will be your take on that?
I'm not sure. I think I might have seen some grumblings about that kind of theme on social media, maybe, but I don't know. I think people are fascinated by these beings that are almost anti-Santas, almost. And I think the reason for that is because we sense that something is missing from the Christmas, midwinter, Yuletide season. And I think I know what that thing is. And I think what's missing from it is fear. Because we've made it so jovial and so over the top wondrous that we've forgot that there's always been Black Peter, you know, Pierre Noel, and the coal for the naughty and the nice list. You can still see elements of the fear within winter that was prevalent to our ancestors and the people who lived in Northern Europe, in the places where they really weren't sure whether if the sun would actually rise again, you know, especially in those regions that have polar night. And that fear, I think, is healthy because the fear nurtures a respect for the natural world. And I think that is somewhat missing from the very saccharine, Coca-Cola inspired Santa Claus that we still love, you know. I mean, I'm wearing him for the love of the gods, you know? And I love the Santa Claus figure, the Sinterklaas, the Sean Corn, we call him here, or Joulupukki in the northern regions. And that's an interesting thing as well. So I like to visit Finland. I'm going to Finland again in January, and their Santa Claus is called Joulupukki, which means the Yule goat. He is not pretty, and he is a dreadful thing to look upon. I mean, dreadful. He looks so scary, and yet he is the bringer of light. He brings the light. He calls the light back. And I think it's because to the people, to our ancestors, this time of year held a lot of trepidation. It held a lot of fear. And that fear is encapsulated in Krampus, Black Peter, the gift of coal, the Mari Lwyd, the naughty and nice list. You can see the traces of that. And I think it's important that we maintain a healthy fear for the season, because in places like where I'm going in January, so I go to a place called Rovaniemi in the Arctic Circle in northern Finland. The sun doesn't rise until the 16th of February, you know, at all. It's set on the 5th of November and it doesn't rise. It's polar night there. So there's 2 hours of very, very pale light during the day and then 22 hours of darkness. So in a place like that, you can get such an appreciation of the wonder of the gift of light, the gift of warmth, the gift of hope, because it alleviates the fear. Suddenly there's this, oh my God, we're going to live. We're going to live, you know, and of course we don't feel that anymore because we've got supermarkets and artificial light and electricity and gas stoves and all of these things that keep us warm and healthy and happy. But I think that Krampus and Mari Lwyd, they remind us, somewhere in here, they remind us that our ancestors were scared of winter. They had a fear of it, but that the fear didn't disable them and it didn't belittle them. It propelled them onwards. It propelled them to live, you know, to fight for life. And I think that that's what Krampus and Mari Lwyd embody somehow. They embody that. And within both of those figures, there's the sense that there is hope, even if that hope is very difficult to ascertain. There is hope there. And in the Mari Lwyd tradition, the hope comes from hospitality. It comes primarily from hospitality and warmth and the gift of, I am this dead thing. Will you let me into your house and give me a drink? Will you let me be warm by your fire? Most people are like, you know, get away. You know? But the actual answer is, yes, Mari, we will, because you are winter and we are afraid of you, but we will show you hospitality and we will offer you a seat by the hearth. And then there's an assimilation that happens then, I think, you know. So I think, as an answer to your not so silly question, that's my take on it, that what is missing is a fear of the powers of nature in a way that doesn't disable, but causes you to venerate and respect deeply the powers that govern us and how our actions either work with it or work against it. And you can't work against nature because she's going to win. She's going to win out.
No. She will always win. And I think that's why it's so fascinating for me, because again, I have this like of death and dying and all of those things that, you know, being Mexican is almost intrinsic, and culturally not fearing death, but because we don't have those winters. We don't. In Mexico, Central and South America, we don't have those winters. Maybe far south in Argentina, maybe they have something. And of course, it's in May, you know, because the world is upside down, or we are upside down, whatever.
Yeah.
And there are wintry, scary tales of things way far south. But in Mexico, we are almost in the tropics. So there is none of that. And now that I live in Chicago, and I hear you talking about Finland, that there's barely 2 hours of light. Here we moan and cry because the sun goes down at 4:30. But it will come back tomorrow. You know? And if you sleep past 4, then that's it. You don't see the sun. But I love that reflection that you just made, which is fantastic. The fear of nature, the fear of winter, and a fear that is not there to stop you, but rather to inspire you to keep going. Because if our ancestors were frozen, pun intended, in fear, we wouldn't be here.
We wouldn't be here. So they developed these things to help alleviate and to help assimilate that fear into something healthy. And of course, that's why we feast at midwinter. That's why we gather at midwinter. It's to imbibe hope that we will get through this. And I don't think we will ever forget that, regardless of how convenient our lives may be or how technologically advanced our lives will be. When it comes to winter, we will always crave the Santa Claus. We will always crave the gifts and the hope and the company. But we will also always crave Krampus and Mari Lwyd. We'll always want them because a part of us, I think, understands on some level, on a profoundly deep ancestral level, that they're essential aspects of nature, and they demand our respect. They don't ask for it.
Yeah.
They're like, if you don't respect me, you're not respecting nature. And when it's winter in the far north, you're gonna die. Because it is freezing. And when I go to places like northern Finland, I have that stark reminder, because I don't have that here in Wales. My life is so convenient. So I like to take myself to these places. I go there alone. And it is such a stark reminder of a fraction of what my ancestors would have felt at this time of year without our lovely digital lights and fairy lights all over the place, and my warm house. To be up there where it's minus 20 degrees Celsius, whatever that is in Fahrenheit, freezing, just freezing cold, so debilitatingly cold, and the sun doesn't rise. And suddenly your appreciation for all of this, when you think Yule, the word Yule means wheel, it comes from the word wheel, you have such an appreciation for that wheel, for that cycle of turning. That I go out from my little cottage on the shores of Lake Salmilampi in the Arctic Circle, and it wants me dead. Immediately it goes, why are you walking around alive? You should be dead. It's minus 20. Why are you alive? And it's like, oh my God, son, I just want to look at the northern lights. Just want to look at the northern lights and appreciate this wonder and just appreciate the fear of it. So that I have so much respect for it then. It's like, oh my God, you are in charge. I am not in charge.
Yeah, no, we're not. I have a little bit of a theory myself. I'm, of course, not a doctor. I'm just a podcaster. But I think that people get that seasonal affective disorder. I mean, for crying out loud, it's called SAD. And I think we get that because we are not supposed to be working on winter time. We are not supposed to be out doing all these things. And I don't think that our bodies have evolved, if you believe in evolution, I do, that we are not evolved to have light in winter. And that's why so many people get this seasonal affective disorder, because they have to be working. We have to be productive because capitalism throughout the year. And we are not made for that. And that's my theory.
No. Exactly. And in the winter time, when there's significantly less daylight, your fingernails don't grow as quickly, your hair doesn't grow as quickly. There are so many things that happen to your body on a physiological level that imply we're being affected. And you think, well, of course we're going to be affected, because the bulbs that are currently underground, they can feel the sun from underground. And we're standing on the ground with all of these sensory things that we have, like eyes and ears. Those bulbs don't even have those, but yet they react to the power of the sun. And of course, our bodies react to it physiologically. We're in tune and keyed into the power of the sun. And I think your observation is really, on the number there, that we're not meant to be as productive in the winter. It is a time for rest. But of course, our society dictates otherwise. It says, no, you still have to be just as productive as you were in July. And then people suffer. People suffer from, lowness of spirit, or iselder. What on earth is iselder in English? What on earth is iselder in English? Depression, and seasonal affective disorders. And I think a lot of it has to do with what is happening with our bodies and its relationship to light.
The sun.
Yeah. And of course, it's a catch-22, isn't it? Because what on earth do you do about that? Because the majority of us have to put food on the table and pay our taxes, and
we have to eat.
It's a catch-22. So I think we just have to somehow offset those feelings. So one of the ways that I do it, the coping mechanism that I have, is to go and immerse myself in winter. Like fully whenever I get the opportunity. So I'm doing that. I can't wait.
And to think about that, we have the blessing and the good fortune to go through it and to be reminded of life, that divine wheel that will turn. people don't ask me when they ask me why I'm pagan, I'm like, because of the wheel. Because of the wheel. Because you can reinvent yourself every season, because you can celebrate every season, because you are aware of the time and the cycles. That's what made me a pagan, is nature and the cycles of nature. Is just wonderful. It has been, oh my God, so good to have you on the show. I want to ask you before we go.
We've been talking for an hour.
I know, it just goes by so quickly. Any plans on I know you're working on a couple of tarot decks. I know you're working on some more classes and stuff. So what is 2022 having for you? What plans do you have?
So I start 2022 by going to the Arctic Circle to start on my next book, which is tentatively called The Power of Tarot. And I'm working on two books, or two decks rather, the Yule Tarot and the Bee Tarot. So they're coming along really nicely. And the Minor Arcana for the Yule Tarot has been completely finished. And I think Erin is now on the 4th or 5th card of the Major Arcana. That's really coming along quite quickly, and it's beautiful. I love it. It's very whimsical and it's a joy. And then we have the Anglesey Druid Orders online course. It's the primary course will go live in 2022 because the pandemic scuppered all of our plans. We weren't able to meet to film, and same old story that everybody else has had, And so we've got that going as well. I've also got some television presenting work. So I'll be presenting some documentaries on Welsh television. And one of those documentaries is about death. It's a 3-part documentary in the Welsh language about death and dying and bereavement. And I'll be presenting it as me, as the druid and as the death professional. And and there's some trips, and hopefully some trips to the States, hopefully, as things, so tentatively things are opening up. So fingers crossed, things do continue to open up. And so, yes, and so it'll be a lot of the same, but slightly different focus. New books, new projects, and hopefully some time to catch up again with friends, because the last 2 years, if it's taught us anything, it's taught us the value of friendship and family and connections. And God's, I've missed my friends. I've missed being able to hug them and just relish in their company, which this weekend I'm so looking forward to people coming to stay, to celebrate. That'll be lovely just to have people here, because we've really missed that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I wish and hope that if you ever make it back to the United States, Chicago welcomes you.
Chicago, I've only ever transited through Chicago. I need to visit Chicago.
Oh, it's a beautiful city for visitors, for tourism. It really is.
Yeah.
Lots of museums, and nobody pays me. I just love Chicago. Lots of museums and lots of activities that are just wonderful. And that lake, and that frozen lake in the middle of winter is beautiful, by the way. Yes. So, Kristoffer, it has been my honor and pleasure to have you. I always tell you, and I will always tell you, I'm not only honored to have you on the show, but I'm very honored to be your friend.
Likewise.
To have you as my friend. And I leave you the microphone so you can say goodnight to your audience.
Oh, well, thank you everybody for listening. And I hope that 2022 brings you joy and warmth and happiness, and hopefully just a little bit of normality that we all crave. Not that I've ever been rather normal, but But thank you for listening anyway, and watching. I really appreciate it. It's been lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you everybody who listened, and thank you everybody who will watch, because we're here. We are sometime in the past. We're not gonna tell you when, but obviously because time changed. It's somewhere in the past 2:00 here in Chicago. It's got to be 7 or 8
p.m. 8 p.m. here in Wales.
8 p.m. in Wales. That's why you get video. That's how you get lucky and get video, because we have to pre-record this. Anyway, thank you everybody for watching. Stay tuned for more shows, obviously on CSNP, the Circle Sanctuary Network podcast. Selena Fox, David and Janet Hewitt. Deborah Rose, and yours truly, and of course, everybody on Paganos del Mundo. We all wish you a wonderful 2022. And until we see you again or hear you again, never forget that you are loved. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
And thank you for joining us on the Circle Sanctuary Network podcasts, presented by Circle Sanctuary and produced for all who follow the Nature Center paths. Join us here throughout the week for various programming connecting the community around the world. And please don't forget to watch for updates on the Circle Sanctuary website at www.circlesanctuary.org. And follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/CSN podcasts. We can also be found on your favorite podcast hosting sites, such as iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, and others. And until next time, many blessings.